This is a clip of the fiercely anti-Israel, and I would say anti-Semitic, Jewish, I'm afraid to say, yes, you can be Jewish and anti-Semitic, but nonetheless, Jewish professor Norman Finkelstein, who is asked by Konstantin Kisin on the Trigonometry podcast a very simple question. I think they really catch him out here, that exposes that he frankly he holds in contempt the idea of Jewish people living in their ancient homeland, and just living full stop, because he is asked point blank, what, if you were Israel, would you say is acceptable to do in the aftermath of what happened on October 7th? What do you think their response should be? I get it, you don't like Israel. I get it, you think they've acted badly. What do you think? And watch what he says, or rather the fact that he refuses to answer. Have a watch of what he says.
This is a difficult question to ask, but I feel that it needs to be said.
Mm-hmm.
The events of October the 7th were vile, awful, and you cannot justify that in any shape or form. Not to say that you are, I'm just saying that we both agree on that. What should Israel have done afterwards? Because we look at what's happened at Gaza, but what Hamas did was an act of war, and it was barbaric. And Israel had to retaliate in some shape or form.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my question to you is, if you were Benjamin Netanyahu, what would you have done?
I am not going to evade questions.
Yeah.
So do not take what I'm about to say as a diversion. And you're absolutely free to press me and press me and press me. But I do have to convey how I see the question.
Of course.
Your question to me has to be preceded by what I would call an antecedent question, which is, what did you expect the people of Gaza to do? What do I mean by that? So,
well, look, let's not get into that for this reason, because in terms of having this discussion, let's accept when we had Bassem on, for example, this was the nature of the debate we had, right? He was saying, well, what do you expect the Palestinians to do? And I said, let's accept that while they're uprising, as Francis said, you called it, I think, a prison outbreak. Let's accept concentration camp outbreak. Let's say that that's what it is. Nonetheless, the fact is that Israel exists. Israel was attacked in this barbaric way. Let's say that the Palestinians have every cause to try and free themselves in this way. I don't know how killing and raping civilians does that, but let's set that aside. That still leaves the question of, what should Israel do in this situation? It still leaves that question on the table. So let's say, without going into the detail, just for time reasons, that we accept everything you say about the suffering of the Palestinian people. Nonetheless, on top of that, what should Israel do in this situation?
I have pondered that question.
Okay.
And I recognize that to say they should have done nothing except to end the illegal and inhuman blockade of Gaza, which Richard Goldstone described as elements of a crime against humanity, to immure 2 million people, half of whom are children, in what Israel's head of the National Security Council, Giora Eiland, described as, quote, a huge concentration camp. What your British economist, before October 7th, he described as Gaza as a human rubbish heap. The Secretary General of the UN.
Let's say we accept all of this, just for the sake of argument. Let's say we accept all of this.
I recognize that question.
Okay. So what's the answer?
My answer is, first of all, on one level, it's a little late in the day to be asking that question. But asking it, you can still make the argument that what whatever Israel did, whatever was done to Israel, whatever was done to Israel. If you, for example, look at the South Africa application, it begins by saying what happened on October 7th was horrible, awful, terrible, so on and so forth. It said, and I'm quoting it, paraphrasing, whatever was done to Israel on October 7th, nothing whatsoever could justify a genocide.
We can talk about that separately, but what should they have done?
I don't think it's so easy.
That's not answering my question. That's the only reason I'm interrupting you. As I think you've observed, we're fair interviews. We've given you lots of time to answer questions. So my question is, what you've described about what's happening in Gaza, what you've described about happening in Gaza prior to October 7th, let's, for the sake of argument, let's just say that that's all the case.
I agree with you. I think that's a fair question.
So do I.
I've wrestled with that question.
So what should Israel have done?
I would say that I'm not trying to divert. There's two concepts in international law, jus ad bellum and jus in bello. Jus ad bellum basically means who's the aggressor, who's the defender, okay? That's jus ad bellum. Jus in bello is how you conduct a war. And you have to conduct the war according to what we call IHL, International Humanitarian Law, the laws of war. That's conducting. I would say if Israel's, I'm not going to say which side is right and which side is wrong. That's jus ad bellum. I'm not going to discuss it. Jus in bello, I would say if you're going to carry out a war, even if it's a war of aggression, let's say you believe Russia's engaged in a war of aggression against Ukraine, it's still bound by the laws of war. And even if Ukraine is defending itself, it too is bound by the laws of war. So I will say I'm going to separate out the question of who's right and who's wrong.
Yes.
And I'll simply focus on then the laws of war. And I would say whatever Israel does, whether it's right or wrong, it still has to obey the laws of war. But Israel is carrying out what, what the International Court of Justice described as a plausible genocide.
So just so I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, are you saying that what Israel should have done is retaliated and destroyed the organization that attacked Israel?
No, I'm not saying
You're
that.
not saying that?
No.
So what should they have done?
I said if they choose to engage in
then they
war,
should follow the rules of war.
then they have to follow the laws
But what
of war.
should they have retaliated? Should they have attempted to take out Hamas? Should they be trying to kill the people who attacked their people?
I would say I cannot accept those judgments, the ones you just rendered. I understand they're not necessarily your judgments, but you're telling me.
Yeah.
Should they have? No, I can't accept those judgments because it's like, for me, I'll just give you the closest analogy I can. When the events of October 7 happened, the first day, it was unclear exactly the magnitude of what had occurred. The numbers were being given where 50 Israelis were killed. It wasn't clear if they were combatants or civilians. And it was only about, you would say, about the third or fourth day, it was clear that a crime of significant magnitude had occurred. Atrocities of a very significant magnitude had occurred. By now, the figure is about 850 civilians were killed. That's a significant crime by any standard. There's no question in my mind about that. Even if you allow for collateral damage and this and that, no, there's something very substantial that occurred there. And then I had to ask myself exactly the question you asked. What should Israel have done, and how do you allocate, so to speak, more responsibility? Let's leave the legal question aside, more responsibility. And after thinking about it very hard, the answer, what resonated for me, what seemed right for me, was to see it in the terms, for myself as an American, in terms of the slave rebellions. And if you look at, for example, the Nat Turner Rebellion in 1831 in the United States, if you look at the details, it was very ugly. Nat Turner, he gave the order to his Confederates, kill all whites. That was the order, okay? And they went from house to house, and unlike in Gaza, they did behead babies. They took out an axe, chopped off the head of babies, cracked skulls, killed about 61 whites. The rebellion was repressed very quickly. And once I felt that seemed like a fairly reasonable analogy, then the question for me became, how did the abolitionists, those who opposed slavery, how did they react to Nat Turner's rebellion? And it was very striking to me when I read, for example, the editorial by William Lloyd Garrison, who was one of the famous abolitionists in our country, where he wrote an article in the periodical of the abolitionists called The Liberator. And he began by saying, and this I think is responsive to your question, he began by saying, we told you so, we the abolitionists, we told you so, we told you so. And he said, we told you, if you demean these people, degrade these people, humiliate these people, exploit these people, rape these people, if you do that, then what happened with Nat Turner was inevitable. And then.
But we've already
right.
built that into the argument. No,
Right.
no, I'm sorry.
But he never said. Remember.
Listen, let me explain to you where I'm coming from, okay? So
Okay.
that I think
allow me just to complete
we're
the
just
thought.
talking past each other.
No, we're not. Allow me to complete the thought.
Okay.
Okay.
If you read the Liberator article, editorial, he never says the U.S. government should have retaliated to Nat Turner.
Understood. Okay. So his argument is probably, you got to free the slaves, then none of this happens.
That's correct.
Fine. Let's accept that. However, do you honestly think that a leader of Israel is in a position after the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust to say, you know what we should do in reaction to this is free the Palestinians, whatever that looks like. This is never going to happen, right?
Correct.
And I'm interested in living in the real world, as I think you are. If you care about the lives of Palestinians and Israelis and everybody else, that means there has to be some kind of way of resolving this that is based in reality. And in reality, whatever way you look at it, you've got two tribes that absolutely hate each other with good reason for both sides to hate each other because there's been atrocity against both sides throughout history. You may argue about who's responsible and blah, blah, blah. Reality on the ground is this is where we are.
Yes.
So my question is, how should Israel have reacted in that situation in the real world? In the real world.
Right. And I think I have responded to you, but you can, of course, quarrel with me on that. And
I am quarreling with you.
As I said to, your name is?
Francis.
Francis. You can press me and press me and press me.
I'm trying.
Yes, and I will accept that. My answer is what I've said before. What in the real world should the Palestinians have done if they tried negotiations, they gestured to supporting either a two-state settlement, here I'm referring to Hamas, or what they called a hudna, a long-term ceasefire, when in beginning March 30th, 2018, they tried, not least because of my encouragement, they tried nonviolent civil resistance. And what was the Israeli response? We know exactly. There's a 250-page, single-spaced UN report describing the response. Israel took its best snipers, lined them up along the perimeter fence, and while there was this festive, to use the word of the UN report, atmosphere among the Palestinians, there was music, there was dancing, there was song. The snipers, I'm quoting the report, intentionally targeted children, intentionally targeted medics, intentionally targeted journalists, intentionally targeted disabled people. They described double amputees 300 meters from the perimeter fence that Israel shot when they didn't kill them, they targeted them from the kneecap down to inflict, to use the technical term, life-changing injuries, which for the layperson translates as paralyze them. One Israeli sniper boasted to Haaretz newspaper, Israel's most serious newspaper, he shot 42 kneecaps in one day. 42 children and adults paralyzed for life. And so when all the options of diplomacy, nonviolent civil resistance, when they've been exhausted, what were they supposed to do?
We've already accepted that. For the sake of this argument, I've said repeatedly, let's accept everything you're saying about the plight of the Palestinian people. None of what you're saying, though, is going to solve what's going on.
Yeah, well, to solve it, I would say you have to use the convention. By the way, just to clarify, even though in our conversation before the program began, I said I belong to the Marxist tradition. I see myself there. I'm not a radical on these subjects. If you can hear me through this whole conversation, I was just quoting international law.
I'm not suggesting you're radical.
So I'm asking is...
Well, there you have it. As you can see, he is simply unwilling to give an answer. And what he always goes back to is he says, well, this was inevitable. You know, it's funny. I've noticed online a lot of the anti-Israel accounts posting saying, look at Gaza on October 6th, 2023. And now look at it a year or so later. Look at all the destruction. First of all, well, then don't massacre Jews and Israelis. That's number one. Secondly, if the whole point was it was a concentration camp, then why are you saying how lovely and built up and wonderful and civilized it all was on October 6th? I thought it was it was utter devastation, which is what led to the massacre of October 7th, you say. The third point I would say is, I can tell you now that if the Jewish people faced some kind of oppression that you describe Israel as having done to them, which I contest entirely, but even if something like that you describe as happening to the Palestinians would have happened to Israel, I guarantee you that we would not support, as a response to that, beheading, torturing, mutilating, raping random innocent civilians on the other side. We just wouldn't do it. Children, babies, animals even. So it's the bigotry of the lowest of low expectations of human beings to call that resistance. It's quite frankly sick. And what makes Israel more amazing is that actually Israel is in many ways the ultimate victim of this concerted effort to try to destroy Israel. Because don't forget, the Palestinian cause is really just a pawn in a far wider global anti-Israel campaign. And they make it seem like the Palestinians are the underdog, but they're actually part of an Arab-Islamic coalition that's 50 times the size of Israel. And they create this dynamic of seeming like they are the victims. But actually, what Norman completely misses, and he does this intentionally, is that everything that he laments and says Israel did is actually self-inflicted by the Palestinian side. Well, they're in a concentration camp, which is such an insult to those who actually went through concentration camps. But he says, Israel blockaded Gaza the second that they left and let the Gazans run it in 2005. Actually, no. The blockade, which was actually just a censoring for weapons, they still allowed goods in, medicine and food, etc., even building materials. But it was a censoring for weapons after the people of Gaza, instead of choosing peace and creating a model for two states in 2005, they chose to elect Hamas. Hamas creates a death cult terror society. They destroy the greenhouses. They use all the international aid and support to fund terrorism, tunnels, train kids to be martyrs. And so after firing rockets into Israel decides we're going to have to put a censorship on what goes into Gaza to stop rockets and ammunition coming in. Fair enough. Oh, that's unacceptable. You're turning it into a concentration camp. See how it's actually the other way around? It was what they did first, as Israel responded. You talk about all these humiliating checkpoints Palestinians have to go through as they go to work in Israel. And why were the checkpoints there? It's like the Jews put these checkpoints in, so of course the Arabs are going to get upset and feel humiliated. No, it's the other way around. There's a culture of Arab and Islamic terrorism and extremism, so Israel says we need to start having checkpoints in here to monitor the people that we're very generously allowing in to work and earn a living inside of Israel proper. You go through every single thing they lament. It's self-inflicted. Even the great, terrible displacement that they talk about that occurred in 1948, the Nakba. Well, it turns out that actually what happened was, in the late 40s, you had a strong Jewish and a strong Arab population in a region where the only sovereign state that existed there was a Jewish one 2,000 years ago. Most of the Jews were expelled by the Romans. They always maintained a presence there, and Jews prayed to return every day. From the 7th century onwards, you had the Arab-Islamic conquest of the territory. Conquest. And empires ruled it, but then the Jews started returning en masse from the 19th century and purchasing land legally. No great displacement that they talk about had occurred. So the UN said, in the aftermath of the worst genocide in human history, the Holocaust, they said, right, well, we think it's time to restore the Jewish people's ancient homeland as a safe haven for them. And the Jews agreed to split the land basically in two, and the Arabs said absolutely not. So they go to war against the Jews, and in that war of annihilation to try and destroy the Jews, to try and displace the Jews, they get displaced because the Jews, surprise, surprise, fight back and win. And now that's our fault? What they are lamenting and pointing the finger at, like they're doing right now in the Gaza war, where Israel's simply fighting for its survival, is just that. They're accusing Israel of being authoritarian, of being colonialist, of all these things, for simply doing what it needs to do to survive. And yet Israel is accused. If anyone, Norman Finkelstein talks about what do you expect people that are victims to do? If anyone I would ask that question to and think, God, how would you handle such a situation? I wouldn't think about the Palestinians. I would think about Israel and the Jewish people who have been targeted for extinction for thousands of years. And in this conflict, yes, they are the ultimate victims here, because the Palestinian side try to kill the Jews, and when they lose, they then create a victim narrative, which is what we know Hamas are literally doing right now in order to gain world sympathy and isolate and destroy Israel, God forbid. We're not going to let it happen. And part of the key to understanding all of this question of cause and effect, which the West has told us, the cause is Israel does something bad, Israel is in the wrong, the Palestinians just resist. If you understand that Arab and Islamic anti-Semitism pre-existed Israel's re-establishment, well, that proves where the real cause and effect is, right? So we have created a new documentary called Arab Anti-Semitism Before Israel's Re-Establishment. It's now streaming on JTV Plus, our premium exclusive streaming platform. You can watch the trailer for it now, and we'll put a link in the video description. Have a watch. Picture yourself. It's 1834, and you're a Jew living in Sfat, which is a northern city in Israel, then under the Ottoman Empire. Your family is part of this ancient city's spiritual heart for generations. You study Torah, you trade in the market, and live quietly among your Arab neighbors. But one day, a mob storms your street, shouting, "Kill the Jews." Your home is looted, your synagogue burned, your loved ones beaten. This isn't about Israel. Israel won't exist for 114 years. This isn't about settlements, the IDF, or the 1948 displacements. This is raw, violent hatred aimed at you for being a Jew. And it's not just in Palestine, it's part of a centuries-old story of anti-Semitism woven into Arab and Islamic history, from the dawn of Islam to the streets of Hebron. The claim that this conflict began with Israel's creation, the Nakba, or modern policies, is a farce, a distortion that collapses under history's magnifying glass. Welcome to JTV Plus. I'm Ollie Annisfeld, and today we're uncovering a history too often buried, the relentless anti-Semitism among Arabs in Palestine before 1948, rooted in a broader Arab and Muslim hostility that began with Islam's inception in the 7th century. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.